I'm sitting here next to one of my spring beds that has a nice row of cilantro in it because today we're going to talk about how to grow cilantro successfully. Cilantro is a cool season crop, so it really prefers the cooler days of spring and fall. And as you probably know, it bolts when the weather gets warmer. The lengthening days also cause it to bolt, so that's why you might notice it happening more quickly as we head towards the solstice. So my first tip is to plant your cilantro as early as possible. I usually plant mine 4 weeks before my average last frost. And if you have a cold frame or a low tunnel, you can plant it about 8 to 10 weeks before your average last frost. It's really better to start with seeds, not plants. And cilantro is great for succession planting. So when you plant it early, you should continue to plant it every 2 weeks for as long as you want if you really love cilantro. Once it's growing, try to keep it as cool as possible. Mulch between the rows and make sure that the soil doesn't dry out. Once we move into the mid to late spring and towards early summer, it's great if you could give cilantro a little bit of shade. If you have a bed in your garden that gets late day shade, that would be a good place to plant your cilantro, or maybe you can plant it in and amongst other plants that could offer the cilantro some shade. You could even try using some shade cloth over a bed of cilantro to see if that'll keep it from bolting. But even with planting it early and succession planting and trying to keep it cool and moist, cilantro is going to bolt no matter what you do as you head into summer. So that's why it's best to just keep planting it every 2 weeks. You can look for heat resistant and bolt resistant varieties, but in my experience, they also end up bolting. But the nice thing is beneficial insects love the flowers from cilantro, so you can just let your plants go to flower if you want. And if you let them go to seed, the plants can drop the seed into the soil in that same area and you'll get another crop of cilantro eventually. Or the seed is what we commonly know as coriander, so you can collect the seeds and put them in a little jar and put them with your spices for cooking later. During the hotter parts of the season, when you're harvesting cilantro, instead of just picking off parts of the plant, I suggest cutting it down pretty low to try to prevent it from bolting. If you have more cilantro than you can eat at any one time, which sometimes happens when it starts to bolt and you want to harvest a bunch of it, consider mixing it into a favorite pesto recipe with some other herbs. Or I really love making a chimichurri sauce that I freeze and then use throughout the winter on some of my favorite dishes. I'll include that recipe with the notes with this video. Okay, so that's how you can grow it in the spring and summer. So let's move on to how you can grow it in the fall, which is actually my favorite time to grow cilantro because it's really the easiest time to grow it. I start planting cilantro about 8 weeks before my average first frost, which is about the beginning of August, and I continue to succession plant it until about 4 to 3 weeks before my average first frost, so into the beginning of September. So like we already learned, cilantro loves cool temperatures. So guess what? In the fall, it never bolts. Yep, you heard that right. It never bolts. It just sits in the garden and you can continue to harvest it. It's also frost hardy, so it'll stay alive past your first frost. And if you cover it with row cover and then later with some greenhouse plastic or a cold frame, you can get it going even longer. And I discovered this amazing thing 2 years ago when I left some cilantro in my low tunnel, is that it actually can survive the winter in colder climates if it's covered. So if you leave it in a cold frame or a low tunnel, it looks like it dies back and is gone for good, but it basically just goes dormant over the winter, and then in the late winter when things start warming up again, the cilantro will start to push up some new leaves and start growing again. So in general, I start harvesting my cilantro sometimes in March, and then I harvested this year all through April and the beginning of May, when then eventually it does bolt. But that's just in time for when my spring planted cilantro is just about ready to be harvested. I know a lot of us love cilantro, unless you're one of those people that thinks it tastes like soap. So it's definitely worth the extra time and effort to try to finagle it a little bit and grow it for as many weeks as possible of the season. And don't forget to plant it for fall because it's so much easier to grow. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. If you have any questions or you have any of your own tips for growing cilantro, feel free to leave them in the comments with this video. Happy gardening!